Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton. A little DT recruiting takes center stage today. Gerry, a little preview. Vodney Cleveland, defensive lineman out of Birmingham, Alabama, expected to make a decision at 3 o'clock, or 3-ish today, between Texas, Florida, North Carolina. I think maybe even some in-state schools trying to give it a go. But I thought it would be a good time, given that Cleveland's going to announce at 3 o'clock, that we should probably do a little defensive tackle recruiting, because the Longhorns also have some big name players on campus this weekend. And there's some guys that have already visited that Texas is still in on. Let's start, though, with Vodney Cleveland. Let you watch a little film, let you talk about him and where Texas stands right now.
Yeah, so he played on maybe the most talented high school defensive line in the country last year. There you see that defensive line, Jordan Crawford, the other D tackle, signed with Auburn. They had a defensive end that signed with Auburn. That's at Birmingham Parker High School. It was still very productive despite three guys closing in on the ball and taking all the competing for all the tackles and TFLs. But his recruitment's been really interesting because he was an Alabama commitment. He decommitted. And ever since that time, everything we've heard at On Texas Football has been more out of state, that he was going to get away, do something different. And that's what this is really coming down to, barring a major change here in the last 24 hours, is that Texas, Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia, those were the official visits. He canceled Miami after the Texas visit, which got Texas fans excited. And I do think Texas has had two tremendous visits, one in a spring unofficial and then the official visit June 13th. So I think Texas has been the team to beat here for the last week and a half, but we'll see what he announces later today.
Gerry, you look at this. This is a big key recruitment for the Longhorns overall, in my opinion, because they already have two commitments out of Dylan Berryman out of Monroe's Ouachita High School over in Louisiana, as well as Corey Wells in Petal, Mississippi. This would be a third one, but Texas is not done at defensive tackle. This is a big defensive line group that Steve Sarkisian needs, because frankly, Gerry, 2 years ago, they signed only Alex January and Melvin Hills. The year before that, they only signed Sadir Mitchell, and he's now gone from the program. And then this past year, they signed only two true defensive tackles in Josiah Sharma and Myrod Charles. So this is going to be a big defensive tackle group, because there's probably some early playing time that they're going to push for. Where do they go from here if they get Cleveland, or if they don't? What is left of Longhorn defensive line recruiting at this point?
Yeah, there's a few guys we're really pointing at. Vodney Cleveland, who will announce his decision today. Damari Simeon out of St. Augustine High in Richland, New Jersey, who was in last weekend as well. Canceled Ohio State visit. That's coming down to Michigan versus Texas, maybe Penn State third there, and he's expected to announce within a week. It's time. Then you have the two guys on campus currently at Texas, and that's Kendall Gerville and James Johnson out of the Sunshine State. Both are from the Fort Myers area. James Johnson now goes to Miami Northwestern. Kendall Gerville's a guy that when I was down there in May, he told me on the YouTube video, which a lot of Texas fans saw, that Texas was his favorite. And they've kind of maintained that through the official visits to Florida State, Georgia, and Florida. Headed into this weekend at Texas. James Johnson's a little more interesting. There's a lot of people that thought he'd end up at Miami. One source behind the scenes thinks maybe it's a Georgia-Texas battle with Miami third right now. So I said all that to say this. They have four really good guys on the board right now, and chances are this class is going to go 4, even 5 potentially, depending on how these dominoes fall. And Texas defensive line recruiting is in a really good spot, Bobby, because, Dylan Berryman's a quality over-the-ball player. Corey Wells is a big frame 3-tech guy who's going to be 6'5", 320 with an 80-plus inch wingspan one day. So they got two really good guys to start, one from North Louisiana, the other from central Mississippi area. So they're in a good spot. And this is they have the net they cast has a lot of talent, and it's really coming down to maybe 4 guys here at the end for 2 or 3 spots.
Well, I watched this, and one of the guys I wanted to show everybody is Kendall Gerville, because we have not talked a ton about him. But, Gerry, you just mentioned him right there. I mean, these guys are all just – I mean, it's very, very easy to see for both of us just how
Yes.
good these guys are that Texas is recruiting. I mean, these are, it goes without saying, but the number of, I would say, high-end recruitments at the defensive tackle position is somewhat rare for Texas. They weren't doing this very often with Bo Davis. This is a little bit of a different tack that Kenny Baker and maybe even Steve Sarkisian and Brandon Harris right now are taking at the defensive tackle position.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, you look at Kendall Gerville, he is your typical SEC size guy. I mean, 6'4", 315, 320 now. We'll probably play in that 325, 330 range, but 80-inch wingspan, right? He's got the big hands. He's got that flexibility and agility to him. Great kid. I that's the thing that I maybe even impressed me most when I went to Fort Myers, Bobby, is he, kids just come across sometimes as really good fits in programs. He was one of those guys. Now, I'm not saying he's going to Texas. There's a battle there. I think Texas has been doing well, but Georgia and Florida are not going to make this easy. And I do expect them to play in the SEC. But yeah, Texas is in there. This class of guys they're recruiting has the 6'1", 320-pound nose guard and Dylan Berryman, right? Then you have Corey Wells, upside frame, 6'5", 290 right now, will be 320. Then you have a Vodney Cleveland that they're recruiting who's 6'1.5", 6'2", 315. It could be an over-the-ball player, could also athletic enough to play as a 3. And then you have some of these other guys. Damari Simeon, I think, is a tremendous football player. I mean, when you're battling in New Jersey against Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, you're on the right defensive lineman. Let's just state the obvious there. And then James Johnson is a super explosive penetrator, disruptor type. And he's probably the smallest of the guys because he's probably 6'2", 270 right now, but he's going to be a 300-pound guy in time. So they run the gamut of body frames, body types, and there's a really good mix of guys they're recruiting here. And if they close out with 4 or 5 of these guys, I think they filled all their needs, and guys that would be multi-year players, which takes some pressure off in the portal every year.
It does take pressure off of the portal. And I think the other thing it does, Jerry, to your point, is the new day and age of the House settlement is going to impact young recruiting. I mean, they've got to be more. I think we believe that the House settlement may tamp down a little bit on the transfer portal, and or if there are buyouts in contracts, it could actually cause an issue with actually going to the transfer portal because they're going to be so aggressive. All right, we're going to have more a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about Vodney Cleveland because that decision, again, is coming up at 3 o'clock today, and I think that's going to be a big one for the Longhorns potentially. But before we do, I want to mention this. Laura Baker, our friend over at Keller Williams, she has an open house today over at 11208 Mickelson Drive, open from 1 to 3 today. Again, that's Laura Baker. Give her a shout, 512-784-0505. That's 512-784-0505, or reach out to her, Laura, at Andy Allen Team, 11208 Mickelson Drive. Jerry, going back to Vodney Cleveland in that situation, how did Texas talk to me about how Texas got into that recruitment? You said he was early commitment to Alabama, but then he backed off. How did Texas really get into that recruitment? Because that's not a typical area. Birmingham is not the typical area Texas goes to. I mean,
So Texas recruited 2 players off of that team last year. One of those being the other D tackle, Jordan Crawford. They never got him on campus. They never made any headway. He stayed strong with his Auburn commitment. Then they had the 5-star corner that was committed to Ohio State a long time that Texas tried to get on campus. So Texas had been by the school multiple times. Kenny Baker, trying to recruit Jordan Crawford, had been by Parker High multiple times. So he had an up-close early look at Vodney Cleveland, even though he's already nationally and regionally recruited. He still was by that school enough prior to Cleveland, but prior to ever getting Cleveland on campus. So Kenny Baker's been by the school as much as allowable per NCAA rules and visits. And so that's really how it got started there, is that Kenny Baker was by the school to see Jordan Crawford, again, the freshman D lineman at Auburn. And then the other Texas staff members were by the school or try to recruit the 5-star corner who they never got on campus. So Texas has been by Parker High in Birmingham multiple times, and that's really how this got started.
All right. So just to sum it up, trying to sum this up here. Texas at 2 commitments currently with Dylan Berryman and Corey Wells out of Louisiana and Mississippi. Then Vodney Cleveland, a potential to this afternoon. We're going to be tracking that. We'll have news here at On Texas Football as things transpire. And then beyond that, Jerry, you mentioned Simeon from New Jersey, right? You mentioned Kendall Gerville and James Johnson, both from Florida, who are currently on campus as well. And so those 2 guys are taking their official visits. We've talked about this at length. There's a lot of guys on official visits beyond just defensive tackles. Jerry, we talked about it this morning on the Saturday conversation. Your thoughts on the overall group before we let people go that are in Austin right now? Is this going to be a situation where you see 2 or 3 commitments this weekend, or is it still like we got to figure out what's going on and what everybody wants to do this weekend? Or where are you at in the whole scenario right now?
Yeah, I definitely not out of the question. Now, some kids already have commitment dates publicly locked in or are thinking about some dates behind the scenes. But I don't think Texas will walk away empty-handed this weekend. I'll say that's an extremely talented group. Now, some of these recruitments are going to go to the wire. You think of Trenton Henderson, who Texas just now really getting in on, have him on campus this weekend. Caden Prothrow, the tight end from Bowden, Georgia. Can you really get in that to where it's Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Texas, and not just the other 3, and you're on the peripheral? Caden Finley, who's announcing July 4th, Texas, Notre Dame. There's some big battles. Tyler Atkinson, the 5-star linebacker, who, a couple of weeks ago, it didn't look good like he was going to officially visit, even though he'd been on campus a couple of times. Then, official visit set up. And I think Texas is very much in the race for Tyler Atkinson, the 5-star linebacker. Then the other edge, Richard Wesley, that one will probably play out a while. You have your in-state linebackers like Paul and Calvin Thomas. And then you have an underrated DB. Maybe underrated is not the right term. He's ranked as a 4-star, but Paris Melvin from Cypress Springs, who recently set up his official visit and bumped the Aggies for Texas, which kind of says a lot in his recruitment. But Texas is in on some really, really good players this weekend. They're not going to walk away empty-handed. The question is how many of these kids will stick to dates if they have them, if they felt the urge to commit to Texas or get their decision out of the way, or, how many guys are just going to kind of stick with those early to mid-July announcements. Most guys will probably stick to the date they have in mind, but we'll see what happens.
John Turntine also in as well. The big offensive lineman. I know that's a guy you consider
he's brother. Announced anywhere from late June to early first week of July as well.
Yeah, and the great thing about him, I saw some video that surfaced this morning. He's getting the full red carpet treatment in Austin from the Texas coaching staff, clearly based on some of that. Hey, Jerry, before I let you go, I got to ask you about Lamar Brown, because that's not a guy that we mentioned. I know the big defensive lineman out of Baton Rouge is on campus at LSU this weekend. He was at A&M the week before, and then Texas the week before that. Yeah. Is he being recruited as a defensive end or defensive tackle?
D-tackle.
Or is he kind of a mix? Yeah.
He's a D-tackle all the way. And I've kind of put him in a different category. Like no matter where he commits July 10th, I think that's going into the season. His recruitment's going into the season. So we'll see where Texas is at the defensive line position come August. If a Lamar Brown or a Jamion Winfield committed to USC said, hey, you know what? I think I want to get back on campus. Then we'll see where Texas D-line class is at and if that's even a possibility. But wherever Lamar Brown commits July 10th, I don't think that's the end of his recruitment. I think it's going into the season.
You think that's going to be one that everybody fights over till the very end? Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Once again, this is On Texas Football. Had a Saturday update on recruiting a little bit, talking about defensive tackle recruiting as we're waiting to see what happens with Vodney Cleveland out of Birmingham's Parker High School. All right, Jerry, thank you so much. I know you're doing double duty. You got basketball coaches all over the place today. You're up at a basketball tournament, going back to Austin later tonight as well. So we'll be in contact if anything happens with Vodney Cleveland. For Gerry Hamilton, I'm Bobby Burton. This has been On Texas Football.